This is for sure a question that I hear on every single JavaScript interview. This is why you must understand what are closures. As you can see here, we have a task, create a counter function which has increment and get value functionality. And actually you might not get it from this task, but this is a task regarding closures, because we must create a function where inside we store some value and we have two public methods. And this is how you typically need to implement it. So we want to create our, for example, private counter function. And this is private because we're storing a counter inside which is not available outside. And actually this is just a function. But if you hear on interview that you must store something inside function after you call this function, then you have a question regarding closure. So what we want to do here, we want first to create our counter. So let's name it count, and by default it will be 0. Now we must return our public API, these two methods, increment and getValue functionality. This is why we are making here return, and inside we want to return two things. First of all, it is an increment function, and this is just a property where we are passing inside our value. And what we want to do, we want to change this count that we have on the top here. So we're writing here count plus equal, and here is our value that we want to increase. And actually it might be that we want to increase it by default just by 1. This is why it makes sense to pass here 1. In this case we can simply call increment and it will work out of the box. And the next method will be here getValue, because we want to get our count back. And actually here this is just a function which will return our count. And the main idea is that this is our public API. This is what is available inside this function after we are calling it. Let's check this out. Let's create here our counter, and we're calling here our private counter function. And actually what I want to do here, I want to console log first of all our counter dot getValue. This is our method to get our counter. And secondly, we want to call counter dot, and here is increment, to increment our value, and then counter once again to check value once again. Let's check if it's working. I'm reloading the page where I'm getting 0 and 1. But the most interesting idea what we have inside this private counter. If we're writing here private counter, you can see that this is a function. And actually we don't have any access to this property count. So this property count in this case is private. And even if I'm writing here counter, you can see that we're getting an object with two values, getValue and increment, and we don't have any access to our counter property inside. So this code is working, but it is really tricky and complex because this is a closure. What does closure ever mean? Closure means that we have access inside of a function to the outside scope, which actually means here, for example, inside increment, we're using count, and we don't have this count inside this function, we have it outside here on the top. And exactly the same regarding getValue, we have this counter here on the top, not inside this function, which actually means closure function has access to all properties inside itself and all properties which were defined before. Why it is important? Because actually with this single liner const counter equals private counter, we're creating a closure. Because when our counter exists, we have a closure and we have this reference to this counter. This is why every single time when we are calling getValue and increment, it is working and it is referencing this count on the top. And you might say, okay, but it is sounding like magic, I don't understand how it is looking like in JavaScript. And this is where console directory can help us. If we will write inside console, not console log, but console directory, and inside I want to pass a function, in our case it is counter getValue, and I'm hitting here enter. Here we don't see a body, but instead our function is an object. And we're interested here in part which is called scopes. And this is exactly what we're interested about. After we open here scopes, we have here a property closure. And this is exactly our closure. As you can see here, we have closure, private counter, and here count equals 1, which means exactly we have this let count equals 0, and now it is inside closure. This is why it is available for us inside JavaScript. And all these questions regarding closures are exactly the same. For example, you might be asked the question, you need to create a function which will store inside secret string and will just return it when we call this function again. So it will look something like this. For example, let's create a function private secret. And here we don't pass anything inside. What we want to do inside is create our secret string. So let's just create a secret and it equals foo. So the secret is exactly our closure, and for it to be available outside we must return here a function. So we simply return here a function and this function will return a secret. This means that when we are creating outside a function, which we can name for example getSecret, we must call here our private secret function. The main idea is that private secret function gives back a function. In this case our getSecret is a function, and now we can console log our getSecret and we just call it. And actually, as you can see in console, we are getting this foo string back. This is why our secret string is actually a closure and it is available outside after we store this private secret inside additional property. In this case we are storing this closure after our function was executed. And closure is a super popular pattern inside JavaScript. This is why you must know how to use closures.